The champagne cork hit the wall behind me, but I didn't flinch. James stood there in my office, his office now, brandishing the bottle like a trophy while the board members filed out quietly, avoiding my gaze. "Don't take it personally, Emma," he said, pouring himself a glass. "It's just business. You understand, right? My name is Emma Sullivan, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the CEO of Summit Construction, one of Boston's fastest-growing development companies. James Mitchell and I had built it from nothing 5 years ago, turning a small renovation business into a $50 million enterprise. Now he was celebrating stealing it all from me. "Nothing to say," he prompted, settling into my chair. No tearful speech about betrayal or friendship. I kept my expression neutral as I studied him. The designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, the gold Rolex he bought last month, the architect's blueprints for his new mansion spread across my desk. My desk. "Congratulations," I said simply. "I assume you want me out by the end of the day." He nodded, taking another sip of champagne. "HR will handle the paperwork. They'll make sure you're treated fairly." The pause before fairly said everything about what I could expect. "How generous," I replied, picking up my bag. "I'll clear out my office." James frowned slightly, thrown off by my calm demeanor. "That's it? No fighting? No threats to sue? Would it change anything?" "No," he laughed, leaning back in the chair. "The board's decision is unanimous. They agree the company needs stronger leadership, especially with the Riverside project coming up. You're too emotional, too attached to the small projects. We need to think bigger. The Riverside project, our biggest development deal yet, a $100 million luxury apartment complex that would transform Boston's waterfront. The project James had pushed for, insisted we could handle, even though it was 5 times larger than anything we'd done before." "Well," I said, picking up the photo of my daughter from my desk, "I wish you luck with it." "Come on, Emma," he called as I turned to leave. "Don't be like that. We had a good run, didn't we? But business is business. You understand." I paused at the door, thinking of all the late nights we'd spent planning projects, the risks we'd taken together, the friendship I thought was unshakable. "I understand perfectly, James. More than you know." As I walked out of the office, I could hear him already on the phone, probably calling his wife to celebrate. Moving money around to stop payment on the checks I knew he'd written for his new mansion wouldn't be the crisis he expected. Not when he thought he had the company's accounts firmly under his control. What he didn't know was that I discovered his secret offshore accounts 3 months ago, right after he'd started embezzling company funds to build his dream house. The same accounts he used to bribe 2 board members into supporting his takeover. The elevator ride down was quiet. Through the glass walls, I could see Boston's skyline, the same view I'd looked at every day as we built Summit from nothing into something remarkable. 5 years of work, of early mornings and late nights, all leading to this moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Mike, our head of operations and one of the few people I still trusted. "Is it done?" "Yes," I replied. "Start the sequence." Mike was one of the 3 people who knew what I'd been quietly preparing since I first discovered James's betrayal. Like me, he'd seen the warning signs, the unexplained expenses, the mysterious meetings, the subtle changes in James's behavior. As I crossed the lobby, I passed Linda from accounting, who quickly looked away. She'd been one of the first to know about James's creative bookkeeping, but she'd chosen to look the other way. Money has a way of buying silence, I'd learned. The morning air was crisp as I stepped outside, autumn leaves swirling around my feet. By noon, everyone in Boston's construction industry would know that James Mitchell had orchestrated a stunning takeover of Summit Construction, pushing out his co-founder and taking control of one of the city's most promising development companies. What they wouldn't know, what James didn't know, was that I'd been preparing for this possibility since the day I found the first discrepancy in our books. I drove to my other office, the one James didn't know about, in a converted warehouse across town. Mike was waiting for me, along with Sarah from legal and Tom from project management, my core team, the ones who'd stayed loyal. "Everything's ready," Mike said as I walked in. "We're just waiting for your signal." I nodded, setting my bag down and looking at the wall of monitors they'd set up. Each screen showed different aspects of our plan: financial records, project timelines, client contacts, and most importantly, the evidence we gathered of James's embezzlement. "How long until he notices?" Sarah asked, her legal pad already covered in notes. The first signs should start showing up tomorrow, I replied. But the real impact won't hit until next week, when the Riverside project contracts come due. Tom whistled low. He really has no idea, does he? James always did think he was the smartest person in the room, I said, sitting down at my computer. That was his first mistake. I thought back to how this all started. James and I had met at a construction site 7 years ago. I was overseeing a renovation project, and he was working as a project manager for a rival company. We clicked immediately, sharing the same vision for what a construction company could be. When we started Summit, we split everything 50-50. I handled operations and client relationships, while James managed the finances and business development. It worked perfectly, until it didn't. The first warning sign came when he started pushing for bigger projects, more ambitious developments. I wasn't against growth, but I believed in sustainable expansion. James wanted to chase the big money, the prestigious projects that would put us on the map. Then came the expenses, fancy dinners, luxury cars, first-class flights to meet with potential investors. I trusted him to handle the financial side, just as he'd always trusted me with operations. That was my second mistake. Show me the timeline, I said to Mike. He pulled up a detailed flowchart on the main screen. Phase 1 is already in motion. The documentation about his embezzlement has been anonymously sent to the SEC and the state attorney's office. Sarah nodded. I've confirmed they received it. They're opening an investigation. Phase 2 starts tomorrow, Tom added, when he tries to access the project files for Riverside. I smiled slightly. He'll find that all the permits, contractor agreements, and supplier contracts are locked up tighter than Fort Knox. What James didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 months carefully transferring key aspects of our major projects to a separate system. Everything was legal. I'd made sure of that. But without access to certain crucial documents and relationships, the Riverside project would grind to a halt. My phone buzzed. A text from James. Board meeting tomorrow at 9. We need to discuss the transition of your ongoing projects. I showed the message to my team, right on schedule. Are you going to reply? Mike asked. No need. He'll have plenty to deal with tomorrow morning. I turned back to the monitors, watching as our plan continued to unfold. James thought he'd inherited a successful construction company ready to take on its biggest project yet. What he'd actually gotten was a house of cards built on documentation he couldn't access and relationships he didn't understand. The next few hours were spent finalizing details. Sarah reviewed our legal position one more time, ensuring everything we'd done was above board. Tom coordinated with our trusted contractors, making sure they understood the situation. And Mike worked his magic with the company's digital infrastructure. Around sunset, my phone buzzed again. Another text from James. Found the blueprints for my new house on your desk. Hope you don't mind, but I've moved up the construction timeline. Now that I'm CEO, might as well enjoy the perks, right? I showed the message to the others. He really has no idea what's coming, does he? Sarah said, shaking her head. James always did confuse arrogance with intelligence, I replied. Tomorrow, he's going to learn the difference. As we wrapped up for the day, I took one last look at the monitors. Everything was in place. 5 years of building Summit had taught me a lot about construction, about foundations and load-bearing walls, about the importance of planning and precision. But the most important lesson I'd learned was this. Sometimes the strongest structures are the ones you build in secret, while everyone else is looking the other way. The next morning dawned cold and clear. I sat in my warehouse office, watching the monitors as James arrived at Summit Construction for his first official day as CEO. Mike had set up a feed from the building's security cameras. Perfectly legal, since I was still technically on the board until the paperwork was processed. Showtime, Mike said, checking his watch. Board meeting starts in 10 minutes. I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. Has he tried to access the Riverside files yet? Tried and failed, Tom reported, grinning. 3 times in the last hour. The system keeps telling him he needs additional authentication that mysteriously only you can provide. On the main screen, I watched James stride into the boardroom, his confidence still intact. He had no idea that his perfect morning was about to turn into something very different. And the SEC? I asked Sarah. Their investigators are arriving. She checked her phone, right about now. Sure enough, on another monitor, we could see 3 people in suits entering the building lobby, presenting their credentials to security. Volume up, I said to Mike, who adjusted the boardroom feed's audio. James's voice filled our office, excited to begin this new chapter for Summit Construction. The Riverside project represents exactly the kind of ambitious development that will define our future. A knock at the boardroom door interrupted his speech. One of the SEC investigators entered, followed by 2 others. Mr. Mitchell? The lead investigator said. I'm Agent Carter from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We need to speak with you immediately regarding some concerning financial transactions. The color draining from James's face. What? Can't this wait? We're in the middle of a board meeting. No, sir, it can't. We have evidence of significant funds being diverted from company accounts to private offshore holdings. We'll need to see all financial records immediately. The boardroom erupted in confused murmurs. Harrison Webb, our board chairman, stood up. What is the meaning of this? Perhaps Mr. Mitchell would like to explain about the $3 million he transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Agent Carter suggested, or the false documentation he provided to secure the Riverside project permits. James's confident posture crumbled. This is ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about. Then you won't mind explaining these? The agent pulled out a thick folder, copies of all the documentation I'd gathered over the past 3 months. Someone's trying to frame me, James protested, but his voice had lost its usual authority. This is probably Emma's doing. She's angry about being voted out. Actually, Agent Carter replied, these records predate Ms. Sullivan's removal by several months. The timestamps and authentication codes are quite clear. While James sputtered excuses, my phone buzzed with a text from Linda in accounting. The SEC is here. They're asking about the offshore accounts. What should I do? I typed back, tell them everything you know. It's time for the truth to come out. Linda had been carrying the guilt of her silence for months. Now she had a chance to make it right. Mr. Mitchell, Agent Carter continued, we'll need you to come with us. And I should warn you, attempting to access or move any funds at this point would be inadvisable. James's face contorted with rage. This is impossible. I have everything under control. The Riverside project. About that, Tom murmured, pressing a key on his laptop. Right on cue, James's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, his hands shaking slightly as he read the message. No, he muttered. This can't be happening. What is it? Harrison Webb demanded. The Riverside permits, they're all locked. The contractor agreements, the supplier contracts. I can't access anything. Of course you can't, I whispered, watching from our remote office. Because you never bothered to learn how the company actually worked. The next hour was almost painful to watch. Almost. The SEC investigators combed through Summit's offices while James was escorted to their local headquarters for questioning. Board members huddled in groups, making frantic phone calls as news of the investigation spread. Around noon, my phone lit up with a call from Harrison Webb himself. Emma, he said when I answered, his voice strained. We need to talk. About what, Harrison? The fact that you ignored my warnings about James's spending, or the fact that you took his bribe to vote me out? There was a long pause. How did you know about the money he paid you? The same way I knew about everything else. I paid attention, something the board apparently forgot to do. The company is in crisis, he said. The Riverside investors are threatening to pull out. We need your help. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. That's funny. Yesterday you thought I was too emotional to lead the company. What changed? Emma, please, we can fix this. Come back as CEO. Name your terms. I looked at my team, all watching expectantly. I'll think about it. In the meantime, you might want to check the company's major accounts. I have a feeling James tried to move some money around this morning. After hanging up, I turned to Sarah. How bad is it? She consulted her tablet. James tried to transfer another $5 million to his offshore accounts when he realized what was happening. But thanks to the safeguards we put in place, every transaction he attempted was automatically flagged and frozen. And his dream house? Tom grinned. The contractors all received anonymous tips about his financial situation. They suspended work until they can be sure they'll actually get paid. The best part, Mike added, is that he used company money for the down payments. Money he no longer has access to. I nodded. feeling a complex mix of emotions. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about protecting what we built from someone who saw it only as a personal piggy bank. My phone buzzed again. A text from James himself. "You did this. Somehow. You knew everything." "How?" I thought about responding, about telling him how I discovered his first suspicious transfer, how I quietly tracked every move he'd made while planning his takeover. Instead, I turned off my phone. He figured it out eventually. By the end of the day, Summit Construction's board had called an emergency meeting. I watched via the security feed as they voted to reinstate me as CEO and accept James' immediate resignation. Not that he had much choice, he was still being questioned by the SEC. "Should we head over?" Mike asked as we watched the board members file out. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let them sweat a little. They need to understand that trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired." The next morning, I drove to James's dream house, or what was supposed to be his dream house. Construction had stopped midway, leaving it a hollow shell of steel and concrete. A fitting metaphor, I thought, for what he tried to build his success on. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. James's wife just filed for divorce. Apparently, she's not happy about him using their savings as collateral for the house loans. I walked through the unfinished rooms, remembering all the times James had bragged about his plans for this place. The indoor pool, the home theater, the 4-car garage. All built with money stolen from the company we created together. "Miss Sullivan?" I turned to find Agent Carter from the SEC standing in what would have been the grand entryway. "Beautiful view," she said, gesturing to the Boston skyline visible through the skeletal walls. "Shame about the circumstances." "How much trouble is he in?" I asked. "Significant," she replied. "The evidence you provided is very thorough. Embezzlement, fraud, bribery of board members. He's looking at serious time." I nodded, thinking about all the choices that had led to this moment. He could have just been honest. We could have built something legitimate together. "People like that," Agent Carter said, "they always think they're too clever to get caught. They never understand that success built on lies eventually collapses under its own weight." Back at Summit's offices later that day, I finally returned to clean out my old office, though now, I suppose, it was my office again. The champagne bottle James had used to celebrate was still there, half empty on the desk. Mike appeared in the doorway. The board's waiting in the conference room. They want to apologize and discuss plans for moving forward. "Let them wait," I said, settling into my chair. "I think we've all learned an important lesson about rushing into things." Over the next few weeks, Summit Construction began to rebuild, not just its projects, but its reputation. We implemented new financial oversight measures, restructured the board, and most importantly, refocused on the kind of sustainable growth that had made us successful in the first place. The Riverside project continued, but on our terms now. We scaled it back to something manageable, something we could do right rather than just doing it big. James pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation in prosecuting the board members he bribed. The last I heard, he was trading his designer suits for prison orange. His dream house was sold at auction to cover his debts. I didn't bid on it. Some things aren't worth salvaging. One afternoon, about a month after everything had settled, I sat in my office looking out at the Boston skyline. Mike knocked on the door, carrying a familiar bottle of champagne. "Found this in the storage room," he said. "Thought maybe it was time for a proper celebration." I smiled, remembering James's premature victory toast. Why not? But this time, let's celebrate something real. As we shared the champagne with my core team, the people who had stuck with me, who had helped expose the truth, I thought about how differently things might have turned out if James had just been honest. If he'd been satisfied with building something legitimate instead of trying to grab everything for himself. To Summit Construction, Mike proposed, raising his glass. "No," I corrected him, "to doing things right, because in the end, that's the only way to build something that lasts." Looking out at the city, at all the projects we built and would build, I knew that while betrayal had almost destroyed everything we'd worked for, it had also taught us all an invaluable lesson. The strongest foundations aren't built with concrete and steel, but with trust and integrity.